Today's episode of Socially Democratic is now available on Patreon. Join Socially Democratic and our community on Patreon for free or for as little as $2.50 a month, and you can help support the show. When you sign up as a campaign organiser, you get access to our premium episodes like this one, and a free ticket to a live show, and a Haters Hate and the Rest Vote Labor merch. And when you have signed up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer asking you for your shipping address so we can send out the swag to you. Today's episode is also brought to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with folks that want to build power to make the world a better place, including community-based organisations, trade unions, progressive businesses, and social democratic parties across the globe. And if you want to create change in your community, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Today's episode is also brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn believe the law should serve everyone and not just those who can afford it. And they've been fighting for workers' rights in Australia for more than 100 years. And they've helped more than 500,000 people get the compensation they deserve. And if you have been injured at work or on the road, you may have a claim through your superannuation. So for expert and empathetic legal support, call Maurice Blackburn Lawyers today. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast that drops every Friday and dives into the progressive campaigns of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. This is one of two episodes that we're doing each week for a while. This is our US presidential campaign weekly recap. So we're going to be joined today and for the next 4 weeks with two good friends of mine who have been on the show before. You'll know Ross Morales-Rocketto, who is from Run for Something and also did White Dudes for Harris, and Katie Parsons, who I had back on 4 years ago when we did the US election recaps leading into the Biden v. Trump election campaign. Katie is a Chicago-based Democratic consultant. So you're going to join me and Katie and Ross over the next 4 weeks. Once a week, we're going to drop an episode. Sometimes I'll drop earlier in the week, and then as we get closer, they'll drop later. Actually, I don't know when they're going to drop because our producer Rebecca will handle that. But anyway, basically, now until November, there's going to be 2 episodes every week, one on the Queensland election campaign and one on the US presidential. So you're getting double the content from us going forward. And obviously, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and to follow Socially Democratic. We've now got our own individual social media platform homes on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So just Google Socially Democratic and follow us on all of those different platforms. Okay, let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a Wednesday morning on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And when I set up this podcast 5 years ago, was it really an excuse so I could do podcasts on the US elections? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But I'm really, really excited by this because we've got a series of episodes for every week, for the next 4 weeks. We will be unpacking the week that was in the race for the White House. And I know that we always say this one's the most important one, but I feel like this one is the most important one. And to help me do that, we have two excellent guests. You've heard their voices before in previous episodes, and they're going to be with us for the next month, whether they like it or not. And first of all, to introduce a good friend of mine, she's joining us from the Windy City, Chicago, Illinois. She's a former field organizer and the regional Get Out the Vote director for Obama for America in 2008, and has worked on successful and successive election campaigns across the US and overseas. And she's now the senior vice president at a leading Democratic consulting firm. Katie Parsons, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And also joining me, and it actually wasn't that long ago that he was on the podcast, but he's back again. He loved it so much. For the District of Columbia, he's a co-founder for Run for Something and White Dudes for Harris, a native Texan, Ross Morales-Rocketto. Welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for mentioning the most important piece of my identity, which is a Texan.
I've been to Texas. I appreciate the importance that it is as a Texan, so I thought I'd mention that. Are you a Texan separatist, though? That's the question.
No, but I am a Texas supremacist. I think everything is better in Texas, even though there's no evidence to support that. Everybody from Texas is way too proud to be from Texas. That is a common trait of a majority of the people who are from or live in Texas.
Yeah, right. Okay. Very good. Katie, do you want to sort of, talk up the values of Illinois right now? Here's your moment.
Oh, at least Chicago, great city. Got everything you need, and it's affordable. But what else do you really want? Which I feel like is a perfect Midwestern answer, frankly.
It was very polite, but factual, and that's the important thing. Okay, now what we are going to do today, before we get going, is we're going to, a bit like, sort of like a political red carpet, what are you wearing today? But not even more, what are you wearing? What are you bringing to this topic of conversation? There's some swag that I've asked you all to bring and tell some stories that talks a bit about who you are, but also, your political campaign journey. Katie, I'm going to go to you first. What are you bringing to today's podcast that you wanted to talk about?
All right, I've got two tchotchkes to share. Obviously, both from Obama campaign 2008. First one is the bobblehead that was sort of secretly left in my first campaign office by, I think it was Max Kennedy and Tim Kaine, who were coming around as surrogates back in early 2008. And I came back to the office and there was one just sitting on my desk. It was just pretty amazing.
An Obama bobblehead. That would be worth something now, I reckon. What campaign were you on, Katie?
This was 2008.
Where were you?
At that point, I was in Indiana it was still a primary at that point.
Right.
Early days. And then my other favorite one, which I had actually completely forgotten about until we were talking about this a minute ago, the Matryoshka doll that my mother picked up in Moscow of the Obama family, with a perfectly lovely and friendly depiction of them. Again, in I think it must have been 2008. It could have been later, but still, what different times, I feel like you wouldn't be finding that now.
I think you'd be getting,
that's what I got.
You'd be getting Obama voodoo dolls in Moscow souvenir shops now, probably. Fantastic. Thank you. Mr. Morales Rocketto, what are you bringing today?
Today, I am bringing you my Run for Something hoodie because I'm, nothing if not on brand. Don't worry, next week I'll probably have something White Dudes for Harris to continue with the being on brand. We've talked about this before, but look, I've been doing Run for Something for the last 8 years. I'm in the process of transitioning out at the end of this year, beginning of next year. And it's been a totally wild ride and journey. And before that, I'd worked tons of campaigns, but running an organization is totally different than working on political campaigns. And I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to do it. So don't worry, I have lots of really good, fun, off the wall campaign stories, and that I can, that can come from some swag, which I'll have for one of the next times, but this time I wanted to be on brand.
Lovely. And obviously Run for Something's doing good work at this selection with so many folks running in those down ballot races across the United States, and we appreciate the work that you guys have done there. I'm wearing, I don't know if you can see this, I'm wearing an official Obama campaign t-shirt from 2008, which I bought at the Chicago headquarters in downtown Chicago in 2008. And it was a lesson for me and my fellow Australians traveling to discover that obviously if you are to buy official campaign merchandise, that you need to be a registered voter and you have to fill out a form, which proved to be a complete pain in the ass for the poor woman who was working there, because she had to fill out the form herself and pretend that she bought the swag so we could buy it, which seems completely ridiculous, because then the Koch brothers or the Koch brothers, whatever their names are, can drop $500 million into a super PAC no one asked any questions. But this poor woman had to fill out 5 individual different forms to say that she purchased this lovely T-shirt. So I'm always grateful for her. I can't remember her name, but I love this T-shirt. I only ever bust it out for special occasions because I don't want it to get destroyed. Anyway, there we go. All right, let's get into it. Now, for the folks playing at home, what we're going to do first of all is we are going to talk a bit about the state of the race. So if you haven't been following what's been going on in the US politics and the race for the White House, here are the basic things you need to know. First of all, in order to be elected president, there is this thing called the Electoral College. I'm not going to go into the history of that, but it's just a thing. And you need there are 538 Electoral College votes, and they're allocated to each state by size. For example, California is the biggest populated state. They get 54 Electoral College votes. The smaller states like the Dakotas, they get 3 each. The magic number is 270. You need 270 Electoral College votes to win the presidency. Current polling has the Dems, the safe, likely, or leaning states on around about 226 Electoral College votes. If an election was held today, that's where you think that those states would vote. Thus meaning that they're 44 votes short of that magic number, 270. The Republicans, safe, likely, are leaning on 219 Electoral College votes if an election was held today, based on the polling. So therefore they're 51 votes shy of that 270. So that means that this election is going to come down to these 7 battleground states in which there are 93 Electoral College votes in play. And they are Pennsylvania with 19 Electoral College votes, North Carolina with 16, Georgia with 16, Michigan with 15, Wisconsin with 10, Arizona with 11, and Nevada with 6 Electoral College votes. These 7 states is essentially, and we're going to be hearing about these states a lot. In fact, each week we are going to unpack 2 of them. We're going to do Pennsylvania and Georgia today, and then we'll move through the rest of them over the course of the weeks leading up to Election Day. Election Day is obviously on the 5th of November. It's the first Tuesday in November, coincides with the Melbourne Cup. That's what was written into the US Constitution. They said we need to make sure the election's on the same day as the race that stops the nation in Australia. No, that is not true, because I discovered in 2008 or 16 that it's not actually the first Tuesday in November. It's the first Tuesday in November after there has been a Monday in November. Did you guys know that?
I didn't even know this existed.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So there was one year, there was a presidential election just recently where the first Tuesday in November was the 1st of November. The election wasn't held on that day because there must be a Monday in November first before you can then say, if it's like Monday the 1st of November, the election can be held on the 2nd of November. But it can't be if it's the first Tuesday. It has to, a Monday must occur. I don't know why. Maybe it was folks from out of town and get their buggies to get to the local voting precinct. I don't know what the reason was, but there you go. So anyway, it's the 5th of November this year. That's all you need to know.
I had no idea. I just learned something new.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. I thought you were talking about the race date, which, like, again, I had never heard of, but huh.
Yeah. So there we go. Okay, let's do it. Okay, starting with what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about campaign narratives first of all. Then we're going to talk about the actual strategy of the 2 campaigns, and then we're going to move through stuff that we'll do each week in a sort of like a McDonald's type of formula. When you walk in, you know what you're going to get. So starting with the campaign narratives of the 2 major campaigns. And I want to go to Ross first with Kamala Harris and her campaign narrative. What is at the heart of the message that she's trying to sell to the American people that hopefully gets her elected on the first Tuesday of November?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. The first is she's spending a lot of time projecting sort of strength right now, and that's I would say like even sort of like bigger than the messaging, and it shows up in all sorts of polling that like people want to see her as direct, straightforward, strong, all of those types of descriptors. And so the campaign has really been leaning into all sorts of those things in a variety of different ways. They've started talking about immigration more as a message. She talks a lot about like specifically how as an attorney general for a border state, she prosecuted more transnational crime. I literally am just repeating the message because like I've heard it so many times. So things that, she always talks about how she was a prosecutor, like everything sort of always pivots back to that. So that's a huge part of the campaign's narrative right now, is projecting her as strong and capable and able to sort of like hold up on the world stage. And that message is like geared towards men, to be honest. Like that is like a male specific. I mean, like it's a resonant message for everyone generally, but like they're gearing their message towards men in a lot of those cases. Um, the second is abortion. If you look at the ads that are airing, and I've been watching a lot of American football over the since the season just kicked off, and because of the way I'm able to watch it, I watch it on sort of like local networks. And so I get to see political ads that are airing in other states. Like half of the Harris campaign's ads are specifically about abortion, which should come as no surprise. People are genuinely very unhappy by the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Dobbs decision. And, that's specifically a strategy targeted at getting women out to vote, which honestly, that's probably where I would spend my time, if the majority of my time, if I were the campaign right now. I would say that's sort of like the second like piece of their messaging strategy, and it's talk about abortion as often as possible. I think the more people are reminded about it, um, I think the theory is the more people get reminded about it, they will be reminded that they are angry. Being reminded that they are angry will motivate them to go out and vote. And so I think that's a smart approach for the campaign. And then today, I don't actually know if this is like a core tenet of the campaign, but I did see an ad that got released, I think, in the last day or two, that was specifically about how Donald Trump is like compromised mentally, and how that means that with a 78-year-old candidate that we might end up with JD Vance as president. And that's just a little scare tactic. And I kind of love it. I don't know if it's effective. To be totally honest, I haven't seen research one way or another that says a message like that would be, and it wasn't directly from the campaign, but I saw it, and I thought it was fun. And I'm sure you'll have show notes or something afterwards. I can make sure to send the ad over so that folks can watch it. It's actually kind of a little bit wild.
Katie, your reflections on Ross's overview of the Harris's pitch to voters?
First and foremost, I'm just really happy to hear that you're seeing all of those ads about abortion. Being a voter and a resident of Chicago, I see very few ads for either candidate, because they are smart and not wasting their money by trying to persuade voters in one of the bluest states in the country and one of the bluest TV districts in the bluest state in the country.
And one of the most expensive.
Yes, let's add that in there too. Yeah, and I've definitely been thinking, gosh, I really, I need them to talk about abortion more. But when you see in the numbers, yeah, it's like 50% of what they're spending their money on, and that is right where it should be, in my opinion, as well.
It's interesting that Ross, you never raised the cost of living, and I see a lot of chat and commentary in the media about how folks are feeling. That I was watching something just this morning. I think the New York Times did a sort of an analysis of folks living in the most reddest district in Georgia. And the thing that they were all saying when they were talking to these voters, now this area will not be a targeted part of the Georgia campaign, right? But it was these folks saying things have got more expensive since Biden became president. Now, obviously, they're running Republican key talking points, but I just wonder about folks in those battleground states, lower middle class and working class folks feeling the pinch. We always talk about the economy as being the most important factor when deciding your vote. how much has Harris done? This is to you, Ross, first, and I'll get your thoughts, Katie, as well. How much has Harris done enough to address this issue leading into what is now people are now beginning to vote?
I think that you have a problem with the fact that I'll just say it. The current president is not the best communicator and hasn't been for his entire term. And you can argue, reasonable people can disagree about how much that's changed over time. But he hasn't been a great communicator since he was the vice president of the United States back during President Obama's 2 terms in office. And so, the primary tool of the presidency over time has been the bully pulpit. And he, as a diminished communicator, hasn't been able to get the message out around the economy, around the things that he's done in the ways that I think, like someone like President Obama could. Now, is it fair to compare Joe Biden to Barack Obama? It is not. Barack Obama is a once in a generation candidate and communicator, and we will not have someone like him for a very long time. So, like, not fair to compare them. And also, it's a challenge when your, sort of like primary person isn't able to communicate as effectively about their accomplishments as you would like them to be able to. And that was the backdrop under which Vice President Harris took over the nomination. And I think the calculation of the campaign, without any sort of like insider information, is that it's baked. People's feelings about the economy are generally baked at this point, whether that's fair or not. And we need to lean into our strengths, and that's not going to be one of our strengths in this election cycle. And I think that's likely what you're seeing happening here.
Katie?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the places where you are seeing her address that, she's offering very specific numbers and I want to say handouts, but that's not what we should be saying, right? Like the what is it, $25,000 credit for first-time home buyers. Lots of various other credits. I think it's like a $6,000 credit for newborns and an expanded child income tax credit. So very specific offerings to address the cost of living, but not getting into the bigger picture, which makes sense, right? Like the truth is that costs are going up everywhere around the world. It's because of global influences. It's really nothing to do with any president anywhere in particular. And everywhere you see a competition, the challenger is accusing the incumbent for the increased cost of living everywhere in the world where there's an election. So this is just what we have to deal with. And she's right not to double down there, because we're just not going to win that.
It's an important. Sorry, you go, Ross.
The time to have done that would have been 6 to 9 months ago, where I think like people were probably still convincible that things had gotten a little bit better, that even though the cost of living had gone up, like, when you poll people, they'll say like, my individual situation is good, but like the economy's bad and other people's individual situations are bad. And so I think the time that we had to convince people of that was 9 months ago, when people's opinions weren't fully baked on it. And, she's been the nominee for like 10 weeks at this point. So like, she came into a race that was sort of in many ways already baked. And I think just had to lean into the things that she just needs to lean into her strengths, and her strengths are not the same strengths as President Biden's either. And so, the campaign had to quickly adjust. A lot has been made of this being the vibes campaign. And, like, we're just trying to keep the vibes good for 3 months. And like, we'll see maybe we can win on vibes. I think we can win on vibes. I think, we'll probably talk about this a little later. Like, it's a solidly 50-50 race at this point. I think as we go through the swing states, we're, with a couple of exceptions, we're basically going to go through each one and be like, they're 50-50 at this point. And so, I think it's, she has to run her race. She can't run somebody else's.
Just an interesting point to make there, certainly for the Australian listeners to this episode. Katie, you mentioned before about, some of these announcements that the Harris campaign has brought out in particular to address some of the issues around the cost of living. In Australia, that's critical in our campaign because from our ground effort, our conversations on the doors are persuasion-based conversations. Remember, voting in Australia is compulsory. So, we need to give our volunteers something to talk specifically to the folks on that door. And so those types of announcements that Harris has announced around childcare or, trying to address like the, removing the, what's the one on the tips? Is it taxing tips? Things like that.
Yeah.
Those things are useful from an Australian context when you're knocking on a door, but just to let the Australians know that right now in the United States, and correct me if I'm wrong, no one's doing that right now. It is just simply turnout. You are knocking on the doors of registered Democrats or low propensity voters and saying, hey, are you going to vote? When are you going to vote? And are you going to go vote Democrat, right? I mean, how much persuasion is happening on October the 16th? Katie, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's more than usual. There is a definite sense that we have to win over like the lower propensity voters, and we'll talk about this more with Trump's strategy in particular. But I think you are seeing more persuasion than certainly was true at this point in the race compared to like a 2008 or 2012.
Yeah, right.
Are we still hoping that we're mostly turning out our core supporters? Absolutely. But that's why you are seeing these numbers being suggested, and it's something we've seen be really effective. Especially looking at like 2018, the off-cycle elections when the party has actually been pretty disciplined about these things in the past. We're learning some of those lessons this time too.
That's interesting. Well, maybe we can pick up some of that when we talk about strategy. Katie, sticking with you, let's talk about Trump. Unfortunately, you lost the toss and you have to talk about Trump and what his pitch is to the electorate. So let's hear it.
Yeah, right. And obviously I will be still biased against him, hopefully forcefully enough. But you brought up inflation, cost of living. So if you ask sort of officially what's the campaign message of the Trump campaign, the people in charge who actually want to try to craft a narrative based on a strategy would probably talk about cost of living. And I was poking around at some numbers around ads, and 70% of the campaign funded ads actually do talk about inflation. But I think the funny thing is, if you ask anybody what is Trump campaign's message, mostly it's going to be some version of chaos, illegal aliens are ruining our country, and whatever the most offensive language you can come up with to portray that. There was a period earlier this summer when everybody was talking about how Trump, he was being disciplined. He wasn't flying off at the handle in various press appearances, and all semblance of that has gone away now. He's truly he's letting it all hang out, being himself, which is pretty foul. But I think that they believe to the degree that there's a strategy that excites their base. Anything that they can do to get people riled up and emotional is going to be to their benefit, and they're finding that is effective with some of the audiences that they're trying to reach. One other thing I'll just say that has been interesting to me since at least 2018, maybe before that, it feels like there's been a real battle for who can paint the other side as the most extreme. And both sides are trying to do it with whatever version of their narrative is. So in 2020, Trump in particular, Republicans more broadly, or the MAGA Republicans, are trying to destroy democracy. That was the first message. And then when Roe was overturned, we were able to really hinge on the Republicans' extreme position on abortion. And we're sort of still playing versions of those messages now. And on the Trump side, it's a lot of the language around immigration has been extreme, but I think you've seen, especially in the last couple days, them reach into the even more egregious versions of that. There's been a lot more talk about, they want to the policies that support trans supportive access to bathrooms in schools, or the trans kids are going to play on your kids' sports teams, and these sorts of things, which are on no one's list of top messages, but they are of a theme, which is they're trying to paint us as more extreme. And that's what that's about.
Excellent job there, Katie, to do heavy lifting on something that is an ugly topic. I should have prefaced the question by saying, what do you think the GOP campaign core messages wants to be versus what Donald Trump is going to say? I should have clarified that. Ross, any of your reflections on what Katie's talked about in terms of what we're hearing coming out of the Red team?
Yeah, and echoing everything that she just said, I think a thing that it's been really interesting because as I said before, I got to see the ads watching football, but also my wife works on the campaign up in Wilmington. And so I've been up in Wilmington, and Wilmington is in the same media market as Philadelphia. And so I've also gotten to see, as I've gone up there, like TV ads that are airing in sort of the Philadelphia area suburbs. And basically, everything that you just said is like reflected there. There was multiple immigration ads. And they're not just Trump. Also I can't even remember the name of the dude running against Bob Casey, who's this senator that's up for re-election in Pennsylvania right now. There's a ad that tangentially links something that Bob Casey voted for to an undocumented person getting out of jail early and committing a crime. And, like very reminiscent of sort of like the Willie Horton ad, if folks are familiar with that from back in the 80s. It was probably the start of like the very overtly racist like ads as the Republican Party sort of like pivoted away from sort of the period of like Jim Crow into like a softer version of quote unquote softer version of conservatism. The other like types of ads that I see are around also, there's specifically a transgender ad about how Vice President Harris as a senator fought for gender reassignment surgery being paid for by the government for prisoners, and how that prisoner got a sex change operation and blah blah. Like there's an ad, and I have seen it a dozen at minimum times. And these aren't super PACs. Like these are coming directly from the Trump campaign. So I think they're really leaning into this strategy. I think they feel like immigration especially is a place where they can win the argument, but I also think it's a place where they think they can bait the campaign into making mistakes around immigration. Because there is complexity around how different like parts of the Democratic electorate interact with immigration as an issue, and that includes Latino voters themselves as well. And so I think it's not just a strategy about necessarily that they think it's winning. I think it's also a strategy where they think they can bait the campaign into alienating some of their own voters. Which, to be honest, I think in specific instances has been successful. I think like the trip to the border is likely an example of that. Like there's also counterexamples. There was a town hall that the vice president did on Univision that was really good, and she got to talk she got to like show sort of both sides of, I think, what she brings to the equation in this race, which is, she is tough. Like, she is a tough, strong person. And also, she's really empathetic. And so she had opportunities to empathize directly with voters who were impacted by some of Donald Trump's immigration policies. And so I think when the campaign is like leaning into both sides of her like that, I think they do really well when when she's talking about, the need to be strong on the border, but also like the fact that Donald Trump wants mass deportations. I think like when they're leaning into the sort of both like the different sides of the immigration coin, I think they're doing a good job. I think when they like lean in to rebut specific Donald Trump claims, then it gets a little bit stickier.
Why don't we use this time to now talk about the strategies? Because obviously we've talked about the two sort of central arguments that the campaigns are making to the electorate. But now let's talk about how they're actually trying to get that out. And actually, I'm going to flip the switch here a bit. Kate, let's stick with the GOP. Just tell us about how you think they are trying to get out their core messages to the electorate. What strategies are they using?
Yeah. So I think, they're doing all the normal things first, but I think one of the things that everybody's been talking about, because it's maybe somewhat slightly new, is their attempt to really zoom in on sporadic voters or first-time voters, particularly men of kind of every flavor, right? Like young men, young white men, young Latino and Black men, for the most part. So finding those folks, making sure they're registered, and then turning them out. You hear a lot about the money that not necessarily the campaign itself, but the party and the various third-party groups that are doing their work, that they're investing a lot in hitting the doors, which is just something that has always traditionally been the strong suit of Democrats. So the story is essentially like they're using the tactics that we usually use, and so it's a question of how effective it's going to be. It's a risky strategy in that those sporadic voters are sporadic voters, right? It's hard to turn them out. If it was easier, probably we would have done it in the past. So it's going to be really interesting to see how effective they ultimately are in doing that. They're also spending a certain amount of money on media. They don't have the piggy bank that we do, at least not officially. But there's all kinds of money coming in through third-party entities, PACs. There was just an article out today in the Times that was interesting about how the campaign is pushing their expenses out through other organizations, for a couple of reasons. One, they're taking in less money from grassroots donors, which I take as a great sign for us. That's always a really important indicator of enthusiasm. A larger share of their donations this time are coming from, big wealthy tech bros than they were last time. So they're able to funnel that money into different types of entities. They can't take big checks to the official campaign. The other thing is they're spending a lot of that money on Trump's legal fees, which, we're not even talking about because it's such a baked in part of the narrative at this point. But he is still headed to court at various points every week, because that's ongoing. So those are kind of the key things that are interesting about their strategy at this point. One other thing I noted or was looking at earlier today is just like which of the social channels are kind of going for which party at this point. And Twitter, which I will continue to call it, has really become a cesspool of the right at this point. And so you'll see Trump is outspending us 3-1 on Twitter, whereas for the most part, we're outspending Republicans on all of the digital channels except for Twitter. But people know where their audiences are, and so that's why you're seeing them go there.
Well, that's a nice way to flip to them. What's the Democrats' strategies? Ross, going to get a sense of where they're allocating a lot of their resources.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like it's TV, TV, and TV. I mean, there's other stuff, and I'll say other stuff, but like it's television. It's mostly television at this point. Now, television and digital, especially the platforms like Hulu and YouTube TV and stuff like that as well. I think there's sort of like two, and that's not that interesting. I would say what's interesting about it is like I think what we will get to see on the FEC reports by the end of the cycle is that more money went into TV on this campaign as a percentage of its overall budget than we will have seen in, let's leave 2020 out because it was a special than in a very, very long time. That's my hunch, is that that's what we're about to see when we get to the end of the cycle. The other piece, as I talked a little bit about earlier, is like this is also like the vibes election. It's the meme election. It's people have called it the TikTok or podcast election. Uh, The campaign and also the campaign sort of like PAC entities that surround the campaign have spent a lot of time and energy on an influencer strategy, on cultivating streamers, on a lot of organic content on platforms like YouTube and TikTok and places like that. I was at the DNC convention earlier in the year, and at the convention, there was like an entire like influencer suite where there were just like influencers coming in and out making content. They had like, Instagram, TikTok background, like backgrounds for them to, like film their videos. They were like allowed on the floor of the convention. They got credentials, I think, for the first time ever. And so I do think there has been a significant investment from the Democratic infrastructure more broadly, which does include the campaign, around cultivating influencers to create organic forms of content. And I think that's good because I think we live in a world where we're going to increasingly see that organic content is going to be significantly more impactful than the paid content that we're producing, especially online. I think, TV is probably always going to have its place, and eventually everyone's going to be a cord cutter, and cable is going to change completely, and we're going to all be getting our stuff like streamed. But even then, like there's still going to be ad inventory. People are going to purchase the ad inventory. Like folks are going to have to watch commercials because like that's how these platforms are going to continue to stay in business. So like ultimately the art of like television ads is going to continue into the future, for better or for worse. It will change. It's as everything always does. It will change in nature over time. But I think especially when you're talking about online ads, where people can skip them, like they can ignore them, they just show up in your feed, and you just scroll past them. I think the increasing strategy is going to be around organic content, and the Republicans are also doing this. Like Donald Trump's on like the Bro podcast circuit. He went on Logan Paul. He's going on Joe Rogan. Although it sounds like also Kamala Harris might be going on Joe Rogan. Kamala Harris also went on Howard Stern recently, which if somebody could have ever imagined a presidential candidate in the 90s going on Howard Stern, like if you thought in the 90s that someday like a presidential candidate, actually like the potential first Black woman, first South Asian woman, first woman president went on Howard Stern, you would have like your eyebrows would have really raised. But here we are in the year of our Lord 2024, but I think you're going to see a lot more of this type of strategy as time passes, just because the media environment is so much more fractured now. There's a reason why when I watch live sports, it's basically half political ads at this point, because like that is one of the very few venues where you have people's eyeballs like locked on a thing. Otherwise, people are watching Netflix, or there's less appointment television than there ever has been before. And so I think this reflects like a pretty smart strategy on the part of the left. The right is also doing it, but they're doing it, like as Katie mentioned, like in sort of their own pockets. But I think, it's smart for the campaign to be sending the vice president, if she ends up doing it, to like the folks like Howard Stern and Joe Rogan. Like, are we necessarily going to pull a ton of voters from that? Maybe not. Are we possibly going to make some people think twice about whether or not they want to vote for Donald Trump or at all? That I think that's a part of the calculation and strategy. I think Vice President Harris this week, or earlier in the week, is going on Charlemagne the God's show. So like there's been a lot of, she went on Up in Smoke, which is a popular podcast that like I do, the sports podcast I listen to. So this has been a really interesting election cycle to just sort of watch where the candidates are getting deployed, like where the surrogates are going, where Governor Walz is going, where Vice President Harris is going, what audiences they're showing up for. So I think like this is probably the most interesting election that I've experienced, in getting to just sort of watch what types of media folks are showing up for and what that says about what the campaign thinks about the strategy.
Katie, can I ask you, is the two strategies of the campaigns as simple as the Trump campaign have got a very, very rusted on loyal base of voters, but they are trying to find newer voters in this lower propensity group and register them and then hopefully turn them out, versus the Harris campaign that has said there are probably more Democrats in these battleground states than there are Republicans anyway, but because there are so many of them, how we connect with them is challenging. Therefore, we've just got to get into certain areas to make sure that we communicate with them and then energize and motivate them to go and vote, partly because a lot of younger people are more likely to vote Democrat, but they are also less likely to vote as opposed to an older voter. I mean, is it as simple as that, or is there more to it?
Well, I think that's the foundation to it. Absolutely. If you have to boil it down into a binary like that, I think that's exactly right. Our voters, more of our voters are younger, and city dwellers who are just less likely traditionally to vote, and that's changed. Certainly in 2020, although because it was such an unusual year and so many people were voting by mail in a way that I don't think they will do again. It'll be interesting to see, whether that persists, whether we see the high turnout among young people. I hope so, because that is good for us. But yeah, I think that's right. Nobody really is being persuaded to vote for Trump at this point, I think is very fair to say.
Yeah.
Who wasn't already likely. Sorry. Let's
turn to what we will say is our regular format for the rest of the podcast and for the rest of the weeks going forward. So I just want to do a quick recap of the week. Now I say that and then things change so much in a week that my recap is now completely out of date. But I guess the things that jumped out at me was obviously Harris has really hit the media circuit hard in the last week or so, and I'm keen to get your reflections on that. Obviously Obama came out and did a rally and is obviously going to start appearing at more rallies, rallying for Vice President Harris leading up to the poll. My other recap for the week was Trump made all his nativist remarks at a rally in Colorado, but that's been superseded by what he did in a rally in Pennsylvania overnight, or in the last 24 hours, in which he just for the last half hour decided to not talk to anyone, but just get the DJ to play music that started to resemble the final scene of Step Brothers. And the guy that, is it Aaron or whatever his name is, Rupa, or the guy on Twitter that clips all of the key moments of a Trump rally. He's been doing it for about 4 years now. It's commented of all. I've watched a lot of Trump rallies. This is the most bizarre one so far. Now that's saying something. Anyway, so these are the major things that happened this week, and I just want to get the reflections from our guests about those things, starting with Harris hitting the media circuits. And I know, Ross, you just touched on it a bit before about going out there and, you know, doing a lot of podcasts and appearing on, maybe appearing on Joe Rogan as well. My question to you, Ross, is, was this always in the strategy that they would do this late, or had something happened in the campaign that they went? Because originally she had not, from the moment she won the nomination up until, maybe 3 weeks ago, she'd really not done any kind of hard, what I would call a adversarial interview with a major network. She did a puff piece, I think it was on CBS, and that was it. And I was wondering, is this going to be their strategy all the way up until election day, that they're going to go, we don't need earned media, we don't need to do this sort of stuff, and we're just going to ride this wave of, you know, getting out our messages through TV ads and influencers. But something's happened. Was this the strategy? Just want to get your reflections on this change in attitude.
Yeah, I think while many things can be true at once, I think one thing that is true is that while the campaign itself is not a new campaign, she inherited the Biden campaign infrastructure and its people, its campaign accounts, the DNC's, like the war chest from the DNC, and the infrastructure that, like, legal and like real infrastructure from the DNC. So like, this is not a new campaign. And she is a new nominee on this campaign. And I think while they were, you know, there wasn't a need at the top of it for her to do a lot out there, because like the vibes were good. Like, as I said, you know, like, you just keep hearing me say, this is the vibe. This is a vibe. This is all about the vibes, and the vibes were really good. The vibes were vibing. She was doing a really good job, and I think she still is doing a good job. But like in that particular moment, she really stepped into the moment in a way that I think a lot of folks in the party were not totally sure she was going to, and she did. She just like stepped in, she owned it, and she did an awesome job, especially like in the first sort of like 2 to 3 weeks. And so I think as time went on, that strategy was always going to be, you know, I think their goal was to see how far and long they could ride that out for. Because like, you know, every appearance includes a risk calculation, you know, and every candidate, you know, she hasn't been on the trail for the last 6 months. And I'm not saying she's rusty, but I'm saying, like, what I am saying is, like, you know, she hasn't been out there campaigning as aggressively as she did, for example, in 2020 when she was running in the primary. And so, you know, I think if you're a campaign manager, if you're a campaign strategist, you're sitting back and thinking like, okay, well, we don't have to do this right now because the vibes are really good. The polls are moving. We're not doing that much. She's going to rallies and like there's excitement and people are fucking pumped and people are donating money. Like, you know, they're raising money hand over fist. Like it just, everything was going well. And so there was no need to turn around and be like, well, we're just going to like take a bunch of unnecessary risks and throw her out there for a bunch of TV appearances to have journalists just like ask whatever questions they want to ask of her. And, you know, eventually that shifts. Like you can't live off of those types of vibes forever. And, you know, like it started to show up in the polling and some of the focus grouping that some of the core groups that they wanted to talk to were like curious about where she was on policy, where she was on the economy, like what she had to say about things. And I think like the narrative about her dodging the media, I don't know if it broke through to real voters or not, but it definitely broke through to the campaign. And, you know, at the end of the day, like the campaign, all campaigns live in sort of the same, in the media echo chamber to some, in some respects. And so at some point, it's hard to keep ignoring that when like all of the press pool that's like following you is asking you the same questions over and over and over again. And so like eventually they were like, yeah, we got to figure this out. Now, what I think the campaign did that was really smart was that they took a look at who are the people we really need to be talking to? Like, who are the folks that need some persuading? Who are the people that need some motivation so that they go out and vote? Who are the people who we need to volunteer and give more money? Where are those people? Where can we reach them? And that isn't always through the traditional mainstream media. And I think President Obama did this pretty well. It was a different era and a different time, and the places that you went were different, but like the idea was sort of the same, which is like he felt like he could take his message directly to voters and not have it filtered through the mainstream media, which any candidate is going to do if it is possible. And so I think then what you saw was, this sort of change in strategy. They did like the Governor Walz and Vice President Harris did like the joint appearance together. But then since then, they've sort of like just been out there like doing all sorts of different types of media and venues. I think the Univision Town Hall is like a really like interesting one. It was like translated into, again, to Spanish. Both Trump and her did it. But like they're finding places where they know that their voters are going to be, or the people they need to be talking to with different messages are going to be, and they're focusing on those specific types of media outlets. I think that's really smart. The media doesn't, like mainstream media outlets don't necessarily love it. It means the New York Times isn't getting like an exclusive sit down with her, but like, like as a campaign operative, my question would be like, why? Like if your goal is to win and everything you are doing is oriented towards winning the election, then why would you take undue and unnecessary risks and have like folks like ask you like all sorts of questions that you have no control over, when you can like go hang out with like Joe Rogan or Howard Stern? And Howard Stern basically, and I don't know it was an official endorsement, he basically endorsed her like on his show, like why would you sit down with the New York Times when like Howard Stern, who has like millions of listeners, is like going to endorse you on his show? Like,
Katie, can I ask you about in terms of the recap that we just did there, Obama hitting the campaign trail and the significance of that and the purpose behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I think partially it's just like this is just what happens as part of any presidential campaign. You roll out the former presidents, and that's part of your best surrogates typically are going to be the previous presidents from your party. So it was great to see that he got out. I think probably part of the thinking in waiting is that you wanted her to be more out front before having him do that. Bill Clinton is also out and about. They've been a little bit quieter about that. I mean, to be honest, I actually don't think it's really that notable. It's just like, it's just one of the things that happens.
There's obviously there was an article in the Times earlier in the week talking about African American voters and and they broke it down by age and gender and compared it to the likelihood of also who they self-reported who they voted for in 2020 for Biden. And overwhelmingly, it's been a cohort of voters that have been incredibly loyal to the Democratic Party for a number of election cycles.
Yeah.
But one area where Trump is making inroads is black men. And I don't have the figures in front of me, but it was like Harris is leading in the overall African American demographic of women or young people, or broadly around sort of 90-10, but African American men, it was 70-30. And I'm wondering if that's
more like, yeah, I think it's actually more like 80-20, and which I think is important to note, just because like we're sort of wringing our hands over every single point that we lose among Black men, and it's obviously an incredibly important. It's like the core of our base, Black people in general, women in particular, men too. But I think that there's been a lot of hand wringing that's not entirely fair over this. I guess I suspect kind of part of what you're getting at is that there's a sense that Barack Obama can speak to Black men in a way that Kamala can't. And I guess to a certain degree, but I actually think that the Black men who are disenchanted with the party, frustrated with, feeling just sort of contrarian in general, I think Barack Obama is probably not the speaker who is going to change their minds either. It's not 2012 or 2016 anymore. So I think it was great that he could deliver the message. There's this sort of question of like, will Black men vote for Black women? Again, I think that's been a little bit overblown. I'm glad that we have a clip of somebody saying that and we can deploy it where useful. But I actually don't know how super helpful ultimately that was.
That's interesting. Okay. Now we're going to turn to our point, which is called Insider Baseball Talk. And I've said to both Ross and Katie, just give us some sort of insider baseball about what they're seeing, either could be in digital or media or field or comms, learnings, reflections, new things, stuff that's interesting. Katie, you first. What are you picking up?
Yeah, so this is actually, I don't know how widespread this is, but I just thought it was interesting. And I think actually, Ross, with you on, it's sort of like the perfect person to talk about. One of the things after COVID times campaigning in 2020, we took a look at the different innovations that happened about how to campaign more effectively when you have to be completely remote. And one of the things that everybody just talked about as such a positive development was fundraising over Zoom. As you've probably talked about, to listeners before, fundraising takes up a massive amount of any candidate's time. It's one of the unfortunate things about American campaigns, but being able to pull together large groups of people, potentially from all over the country, and certainly that was the case with these presidential level Zoom fundraisers. You can just it's an incredibly efficient way to raise a lot of money, talk to a lot of people. You don't have to send your candidate, across the country, maybe on a 4-hour flight to get into a room with a much smaller number of people. I just think it's one of the few things I've seen that has really stuck around from 2020 as a campaign innovation. I don't know how many candidates who are further down the ballot are still doing that. I mean, I literally just don't know. I don't know if there are folks running for Senate and Congress who are doing that again this cycle. I don't know if they're able to pull in the same kind of audiences, but I hope that they are, because I think it's a really efficient way to raise money.
If you want to learn more about what that looks like, Ross and I had an episode a couple of weeks ago where Ross went into a hell of a lot of detail about the White Dudes for Harris, which was an incredibly successful fundraising event that Ross organised. How much did you raise in the end, Ross? 4 million?
4.5 million.
No small chicken. Okay.
Yeah, over how many hours?
3
hours. And how many donors do you remember, or how many people?
Over 70,000 individual donations.
I mean, that's incredible. I was saying earlier, Trump's seen a massive decline in his grassroots donations. This is another, just when I look for glimmers of hope, because let's not forget, it's still a tied race. When I look for those glimmers, this is absolutely one of them.
Ross, what are you seeing from the campaigns that's of interest?
I think I cannibalized my point a little bit from earlier. I forgot that I was going to say it here. For those who don't know, you have to prepare for these things. Making sure that we knew that we had to do some preparation. But I think it's really the organic content strategy, especially around streamers and streaming, that has been, I think, really interesting to me. And I think I just think we're only going to see that happen more and more frequently, especially because it reaches very specific audiences that are super hard to get to otherwise. We're still, as a party, altogether really like learning about how to do it and how to do it well and effectively, because like and I think like more is more this election cycle. So like the more that we can put resources into doing it, the more we're going to learn. The more we learn, the better we'll get at it. And I also think that these types of approaches are really important to experiment on now and have been important to experiment on for the last few months, but will be even more important to continue to do post-election. Because, I think Katie said this a little bit earlier, like there's just the number of people who are truly persuadable is pretty small at this point. And so a lot of what we're doing isn't going to persuade people. It's either going to convince them to vote or it's going to convince them not to vote. And there are small groups of people who are persuadable, and the campaigns know who they are and they're going after them super aggressively. They have they have the voter files and all the analytics and like all that stuff. So like they know who these people are and are aggressively going after them. So I'm really excited to see sort of what happens in the organic content space as we go forward. The hardest part about it though is that like the economic incentives of it, especially for content creators, are all over the place and they change on like a weekly basis as like the platforms change things, like YouTube and TikTok and like all the others. And I think the other piece of it is where we start at a slight disadvantage to Republicans on this, because the right has built a massive ecosystem of grievance-based like content and streaming and all of that stuff. And it often gets called the manosphere, and like it's usually there's some sort of right-wing ideology, although it's not always political in nature necessarily, but like more sort of traditional sort of like right-wing. And there's always a scapegoat. Often it's women, immigrants, people of color, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of money to be made for content creators on the right. And I think that's why we start at a little bit of a disadvantage in this space, because like we're not trying to do grievance based like political work like with these folks. And there's more money in it on their side right now. And do I think we can change that? Absolutely. And especially with a lot more time. Do I think we can change it in the next 20 something days? Definitely not. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it.
Let's segue to a section now called Swing State Spotlight. I need to get sponsors for these things like they do on ESPN, there's segments. Like this is brought to you by Arby's. And we're going to look at two states today, starting with Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. And Katie, tell us a bit about PA.
Yeah, Keystone State indeed. So anybody who's reading anything about the election will have heard about Pennsylvania. It's widely considered to be the tipping point state, or basically it's the most likely indicator of whether we win or whether Trump wins. As Stephen said earlier, there are 19 electoral college votes in Pennsylvania, so it's certainly not the most, but it's the most of the battleground states. And what will be and is reassuring to everybody is that we're in a dead heat, statistical tie. We have been in a statistical tie kind of for months. There was a little inversion in early August where even though it was still essentially a tie, we are now 1 point ahead on average if you average all the polls. Does that mean anything? No, probably not. But it's still, I'd rather be on top than on bottom. So that is the one thing to look at there. Yeah, let's see what else. Oh, you asked us to talk about where to watch, like on election night. What are the kind of indicator geographies within Pennsylvania? So you have two big cities, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Those are your urban centers, and those are always Democratic strongholds. And then you've got a couple of counties that surround Philadelphia, which are, when we talk about suburban white ladies who were trying to turn out for Kamala, that's where they live. So those are all going to be the places where we try to run up the score. Then probably the most interesting county will be Erie County, which is one of the like true bellwether counties for the country. I saw a stat that of the 25 last elections since 2008, so this includes local elections too, but Erie County picked correctly 23 times out of 25 for the top of the ticket, essentially. So it's very swingy. It's your very typical Rust Belt state. It's a little older. It's a little whiter. It's bluer collar. There used to be a lot of manufacturing there. Not so much anymore. So I think you actually see the same dynamics in lots of places around in Europe, probably in Australia too, where these folks used to be reliable Democrats, but as they just see cultural shifts and then end of manufacturing base, they've and the end of unions dominance in their community, they're moving further and further to the right. So we will see how they go, and that will be that will be one that they're watching on election night, and trying to use as some kind of indicator. The one other county I'll talk about that will be kind of interesting, more from just like an indicator again, but Lackawanna County, which is where Joe Biden is from. It's where Scranton is, and it's very similar to Erie. It's another one of those Rust Belt counties, so they could go for Trump, but we'll want to see, hopefully, that Biden can hold that county.
Let's not bury the lead. Pennsylvania kind of almost is ground zero for this campaign in so many ways. And even from the money that's being poured into, I saw some stat earlier in the week, $155 million the Trump campaign has spent on TV advertising in the Philadelphia area alone. And I think Harris, it was reported that spent $190 million. It's so close. Like, even if you look at the state house is evenly balanced. I think the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, is that right? And the House is controlled by the Democrats, and the House is split 9-8. Like, every way you look at it, it is such a finely balanced state. The polls, as you mentioned before, Katie, are just so close. Thank God Harris is, even though it's only a percentage point, but I'd rather be up than down compared to some of the other races. It's just going to really all come down to who gets out on the day. Now, historically, when I canvassed in 2016 for Hillary, it was same day. It was on the day voting in Pennsylvania, but they've changed that now, right? You can early vote in PA. Is that right?
Yes, you can, and in fact, it has started already, and you are seeing. Actually, I don't want to say this with certainty about Pennsylvania. I know it's true in Georgia that early turnout numbers are really strong. I think in Pennsylvania they're off of 2020 a little bit, but 2020 doesn't really count because of, again, everybody was voting early or by mail-in vote. So again, if you're looking for glimmers of hope, it doesn't really tell you anything, like how many people have voted early, because those people could also be Republicans. There's some argument I heard earlier today that actually maybe you'll see a lot more early vote turnout and mail-in turnout from rural counties in Pennsylvania than you did last time. But I still think it's an indicator of enthusiasm. Like if we saw a real collapse in early vote, I think that would be concerning. And we are not seeing that in Pennsylvania or in other places.
Over the course of the coming weeks, we will keep you up to date with some of those things that Katie has just mentioned there as well. So we're not going to not talk about Pennsylvania again. But anyway, thanks, Katie, for that lovely overview. Let's go to Georgia and Ross. The Peach State.
Georgia's got 16 electoral college votes. It's currently a pretty dead heat there. If you look at the 538 like polling average, which I actually almost never do. I only literally did this for this podcast. I basically refuse to look at the polling averages because it can do nothing but stress you out. It leans Trump +1, but I think it's like 47, 48 at this point. And I will say, a thing that was interesting as I was looking through sort of some of the polling averages is that Republicans seem to have like flooded the media market with a bunch of like Republican leaning polls. So like it's actually, 538 tries, a bunch of them try to filter some of that stuff out. So it's a little unclear whether that's where we are on that. There's no Senate or governor's race there this cycle, which I think does hurt us a little bit. I think Raphael Warnock being on the ballot helps us quite a bit when he is on the ballot. He's, one of the things we talk about often at Run for Something is candidates that are good fits for their districts. Raphael Warnock's an incredible fit for the state of Georgia. He outperformed Jon Ossoff. He probably always will outperform Jon Ossoff. He is a very, very strong candidate for that state. And so, I think it would be helpful if we had him or any of the Senate candidates on the ballot, but we don't. So that is what it is. In terms of sort of how the political geography and demographics of Georgia work, Georgia is different than like a lot of like the sort of like than like a state like North Carolina or Arizona where it's like white, black, and brown. Like Georgia is white and black. There are small pockets of Latinos. There are small pockets of AAPI community. Those communities are actually really important for us, and we actually need to go out and get them. But like the voter, when people look at the way that we were able to flip Georgia, right? And they look at other states, what they're really looking at is like, is there an anchor demographic there that we think we might be able to win at some point? And, like Georgia has like a large number of Black people, and most states most states don't have like those types of demographics. That's like one of the biggest reasons why we've been able to flip Georgia. That and like really incredible organizing efforts to get those folks organized and out to vote that, was like largely led by Stacey Abrams and like some other folks who are there and still continuing to do work there. The Atlanta metro area is enormous. There are I think it's about 6.8 million people in the Atlanta metro area, which makes it smaller than the Houston metro area, which I only say because I'm from my home state of Texas. But it's huge, and it encompasses like many counties. So like when you hear about Atlanta, you'll often hear about different counties. You'll hear, if you watch U.S. election coverage, you'll hear about like Fulton and Gwinnett and DeKalb, Cobb and Clayton counties. Those are like those are among the counties that encompass the Atlanta metro area. All of them are a little bit different and have like sort of a different mix around sort of like their diversity. I would say that like there are, and then people often forget about other parts of the state, but like there are other key important parts of the state. There's Savannah, which is has like good solid Democratic votes there. And then there's a region that sort of like cuts across the eastern to the western part of the state that folks call the Black Belt, which like extends through the entirety of the South if you sort of like expand like further from that. But like the Black Belt is much more rural counties where there are higher concentrations of Black folks who live there. Those are places that I would like definitely be looking at. Those are places that we need to be out there organizing, where we have people who will vote for us. We just have to get them. We have to go talk to them. And Atlanta is clearly going to be important, as Atlanta, you know, like most of the population of the state of Georgia is in Atlanta. So like as Atlanta goes, the state's going to go. Um, and I think we need to be able to win in places like big in places like Savannah and the Black Belt as well, because we're going to get our asses kicked in like a bunch of these other rural areas. And, you know, like this isn't new to politics. Like anyone who's ever done any work in the Midwest, like in a Midwestern state, knows that like the path to victory is to run up the score as much as you can in the big cities and to lose by as little as possible in the more rural counties, right? It's like that is how we win every time. It is the only way we really know how to win. We've tried doing it other ways. It doesn't really work. I think, you know, like the 2016 election is probably the best example of that. You know, like in rural counties and basically every major swing state, Pennsylvania included, we were getting blown out 88-12, 92-8. Like those were the types of scores. To win in places like Georgia and Pennsylvania, we need to be losing these places like 80-20, you know, like 73-27, you know, like we need to eat into the margins a little bit, and we need to go out and find like every marginal vote that we can in all of these different areas. And I think like, you know, that is, you know, where Georgia is a tough place for us this year because there is nobody else at the top. Like there is no Senate candidate. You know, Bob Casey is up on the ballot in Pennsylvania. That will probably help the vice president. In Arizona, you have like Ruben Gallego, who's like up by quite a bit, although the polls have started to close a little bit. And I'm sure we'll talk about Arizona at some point. I think it's tough. Not having a Senate race is tough because the Senate candidates tend to be in the swing states outperforming the top of the ticket right now. Even in Texas, for example, where you've got like Colin Allred, where I think sort of like some polls have him within 2 points, you know, at some point. If anyone's ever interested in talking about that, I don't think it's real. I don't think Colin Allred's chances of winning that race are real, but I do think that he is closer than people think he is. So I think that makes Georgia a little bit more difficult this year than probably in previous years. But like Georgia's a really interesting place. And you know, I know that like there is like significant work also specifically going into reaching out to like Latino and API communities in the state this year, which I think will probably play like an outsized role because the margins there are just going to be so small. Like, you know, we like if we win or lose Georgia, it'll probably be by less than 30,000 votes overall. And so that's why we just like need to be out there finding sort of like every possible vote that we can, whether that's, you know, in rural counties or Savannah or Atlanta in the suburbs.
And we'll continue to talk about Georgia, no doubt, over the course of the next couple of weeks. Thank you, Ross, for that excellent overview. We are running out of time, and so we've got a couple of things we need to finish off before we close for the day. This has turned into a monster podcast, which I do appreciate. We're going to do blue skies ahead and red flags of the week. So starting with blue skies ahead, what's giving you hope this week for the campaign, starting with you, Katie?
this isn't particular to this week, it's in general. I'm still, the thing that gives me another glimmer is that abortion does continue to be so salient for people's choice this cycle. And it's tangible. You can tell very compelling stories about abortion and access to women's health care. It really pisses ladies off. And actually, it's been really fascinating to me to see the polling among men who really prioritize this issue. It's been sort of inspiring, honestly. And I think it's something, it's so tangible, right? There, even when you're talking about cost of living, for example, we were talking about the specific, I'm going to say it again, handouts. Damn it. I need a better, what are we calling these? Anyway, tangible numbers that are really sticky for people. I think that abortion does that naturally. Like, you don't have to work hard to understand what it means for you personally, potentially, for your family, for women and there are a lot of ladies in this country, and they vote. So, I look at the poll numbers, and I'm sort of flabbergasted that we don't see a runaway victory. But every once in a while, I wonder if maybe we're just undercounting the impact of this.
We don't have time to do polling today, to talk about polling, but I have a heap of questions that I'm going to hold over for next week about that anyway. And as these numbers keep coming in, Ross, what's your blue skies ahead reflection?
This one is a little bit broader, but like, so many weird and wild things have happened this election cycle on our side specifically. And the fact that like this race is a solidly 50-50 race at this point is actually like gives me hope. Like, after that first debate, there's nothing scientific about this, but like if you'd asked me to handicap it, and maybe you did, and we talked about it, like I would have given us a 10 to 20% chance of victory after that first debate. And I'll take a 50-50 race. Now, does it make me nervous? Does it mean that like 1,000 different tiny things going wrong could change the outcome of the election and it's impossible to know what those things are? Yeah, like it's more risk than I'd like. But we switched nominees in the middle, like a month before our convention, and she's going to have 3 months to take it across the finish line. And she is solidly 50-50 against a candidate who was previously elected president of the United States. And so when you sort of like zoom out and look at the big picture of it, like I feel hopeful. Like we are in a better place than we were 2.5 months ago. And I feel really, really good and grateful for that.
And on the flip side, probably should have flipped these around so we ended on a high note, not on a low note, but maybe this is a bit more grounding. Katie, what's red flag of the week? What's giving you cause for concern?
Again, this is not just this week. And Stephen, you sort of hinted at this at the very top, which is that we have an electoral college. And because of the way those 538 votes are allocated across the states, there's a real bias against Democrats at this point. So Nate Silver, who does lots of modeling and things like that, according to his numbers, there's currently, it's like a 24% chance, right? So that's like 1 in 4 chance that we win the popular vote and still lose the electoral college. There is a 0.1 chance that you could say the same for Republicans, that they would win the popular vote and lose the electoral college. I was also looking back, the last time that the Democrats lost the popular vote was 2004, George W. Bush, and we were still in a war, right? So like that, it just, we're gonna win the popular vote. So that should feel great. But in fact, that's not a guarantee. And that's really annoying.
I mean, even like we won the popular vote in 2000. So like it means that in the last 24 years, Republicans have won the popular vote out of the last 6 presidential elections one time, 5 technically, but
And
we'll
by
probably,
less than a point.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know. It's it's a weird thing about your politics, but that's what we've got, and that's what we're going to have to operate with, I guess. Ross, what's your red flag for the week?
Field, I think this is an election that's going to be decided by field margins, and I think field is going to be the most important thing that we do this election cycle, and it's the thing that has me the most concerned, is making sure, I don't know that I've ever seen an election where people are more interested in doing things that are not useful than this one. Like people like want to do all sorts of like weird stuff and like, like +1 their clout and all that stuff. And that is starting to crowd out some of like the like pieces where we need to be like getting people out on the doors, not like making phone calls, sending text messages. Shit, I don't really believe in letter writing, but like there's data on it, and while I'm skeptical of the data on letter writing, like shit, like for people who cannot leave their homes and are not comfortable on the phones, like even letter writing, like I'll take it. Just like we need to be doing good old-fashioned voter contact. That is all we should be thinking about. That is all we should be pushing people to doing right now. I do not care what people post on social media unless they're going out to vote early and they're posting about their votes on social media. I know that like this makes me sound really old school, and all that stuff, and I'm totally comfortable with that. I think we need to be out there on the doors, talking to voters, getting people out to vote, and anything that isn't doing those things is getting in the way of doing those things. So that's, here I am being the crotchety old man saying, get off my lawn.
I think you're preaching to the converted here. This is a very pro-field podcast, so you're very much at home, Ross, on those sentiments. Yeah, well, I don't want to hear about I'm getting the word out in my own way kind of bullshit. You need to go and actually knock on doors and talk to voters, right? Yard signs don't vote. I'm working on a political campaign right now, and people are obsessed about fucking campaign posters in shop windows. I'm like, dude, just go talk to some voters, please. Like, enough with the posters. Can we just go? Anyway. We're out of time. We were going to do the 3 craziest things that Trump did this week, but we're going to look. There'll be 3 more crazy things he does next week, so it's not like really, we're missing out on anything. But before we close out, I just want to mention to anyone who is listening to the show in the United States, and to the point that Ross just said, don't try and get the word out your own way. Please go volunteer your time to go knock on some doors or make some calls. We've left a link in the bio for this week's episode, or you can just go to events.democrats.org, and then there's a whole map of America, and you can click on a particular state you're in, and then click on a town, and then click on a precinct, and there'll be a field office there, and you can just volunteer your time. I'm doing that in a couple of weeks' time. I'm heading over to the States in late October, and I'm going to Michigan to go knock on doors there to do my bit, and I'm bringing 4 Australians with me. So I'm doing my part. If I can do my part and I live on the other side of the world and you live in the United States, then you can surely get off your ass and go down to your local field office and knock on some doors yourself, because it's too important. Katie Parsons, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week when we talk more. And Ross Morales Rocketto, also thank you so much for coming on the show this week. Looking forward to speaking to you both as we get us closer to Election Day.
Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks so much. See you next week.
Hey there. Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button, and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. And to get all the latest updates on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday.